At the end of your life, what will be your legacy? What will you leave behind for future generations? For the world, join the World Messenger, Isabella Lundberg, each week as she brings you a new distinguished guest from the business, sports, or entertainment world to share their success, their struggles, and their lessons. They will share their insights into current hot topics that affect everyone. Isabella facilitates an intimate, vulnerable environment to find the true value of humanity and real leadership. Are you ready for your legacy? The legacy that matters?
Hello, my beautiful friends. It's Isabella here, the World Messenger, inviting you for another epic episode of Legacy Leader Show. Today, I have in studio 6 times co-founder and former actually co-founder of Food Network. And you guys cannot absolutely wait to hear what he's up to today. He is also published author of the book Going Back, which I cannot wait to depict with you. And what's that all about? He's also a huge philanthropist, supporter of so many great causes around the world, and also very dear friend and colleague who I absolutely admire, actually great advisor and mentor also. And without further ado, let me introduce you to Stephen Cunningham. Stephen, how are you?
All the better for being in your orbit.
Likewise, you are a champion that continues to prepare and adjust for decades and decades, and continues always to think how to navigate current environments and still be able to succeed. First of all, I am just blown away on your journey and seeing how you overcame so many obstacles, and also how much you position and also help others to position for success. So do you want to share a little bit, where do you grow up, a little bit about your upbringing and how that upbringing really helped you out where you are today?
Happy to. I hope you can get some insights from this. I was born and raised in New York City. And both of my parents were the children of immigrants. All 4 of my grandparents were born in Ireland, and they all came over in the 1920s to New York City, and where my parents were born and where I was ultimately born, and then spent my childhood in the Bronx, and ultimately had the benefits of a parochial school and then a private school education, and am about as native New Yorker as you can possibly be. And the lessons of that experience are that you learn to operate in competitive environments, or environments with a lot of people. And so you learn to engage with people, and you learn to appreciate that different people approach different matters differently. And that gives you a flexibility when you're thinking about business ideas and when you're thinking about projects of any kind, because you know that one of the things I think you learn early on, if you're raised in a big city, is that there are multiple ways to get things done, and that insight gives you a humility about the value of your solutions versus other people's solutions. If you've identified the results that you want to achieve, there are a lot of ways to get to there.
I love that. That is such a gold and such an important lesson for everybody watching and listening. And you mentioned something beautifully there. You also explored private education, and obviously you have phenomenal degree in from Columbia University, and law that you finished there, and then went to law school. That really, I'm sure, was also very handy for this journey. So do you mind sharing, first of all, how did you decide to study law and what really propelled you? And also, could you contrast a little bit of that private education? How was that pivotal to your success and also your thinking? In addition, living in hectic, amazing, fast-paced New York City.
Well, that's a great question. I say great because it's one I haven't given much thought to, at least before this moment. I am. I think for most of my life, I've sort of gone along sort of with the ambitions of the people around me, articulating what they wanted me to achieve. And it was all of a sudden when I got to Colorado, now almost 40 years ago, that I realized, I could carve a different path than the one that I'd been sort of teed up for. I was a graduate of Columbia Law School. I had worked for the Congress for several years, and then I met this beautiful woman who said she would marry me if I'd move to Colorado. And I found myself very quickly after making that move, uh, just not that content at a law firm. I mean, I just felt it was an ancillary role, and I thought there was much more exciting to be part of the creative process and the innovation process and the process of bringing together the relevant elements to make things happen. And got involved in projects like that really from the mid '80s on. I started working at a cable television industry for a company called TCI, which at the time was the biggest cable company in the world, based right here in Denver, Colorado. Thank you, John Malone,
Yes.
and others. And I just was really given as much rope as I could handle in that process. To hopefully not trip, but to keep pressing forward. And that was, ultimately that's a great setting to be in. Where you're encouraged to move forward, uh, and you're given the leeway to sort of make decisions along the way. And as you make those decisions and have experience with it, you're like increasingly going, I can make
Mm.
good decisions, I can make bad decisions, but the road keeps moving on, and it's our duty to continue to take steps forward. So I'm not sure that's responsive, but I'm trying to be.
That is such a great reflection and point, because we are sometimes taking a risk, right? And you were definitely a risk taker. And I'll look at how things turned out, and then also what that propel you. And we sometimes needed a time for self-discovery, because we don't know how working for Congress, working in a law firm, as you mentioned, really going to impact us until we try. And quicker we discover more about ourselves. You're one of those that is willing to position differently, willing to look at things from a different perspective. And Colorado, I mean, you enrich Colorado in so many ways. And if you don't mind, I'm really curious. I've always been fascinated by the story. How do you come up with funding your first company? And I believe that was the first food network, right?
Well, actually, before the Food Network, we started a couple of TV shopping companies, one of which was the predecessor to QVC,
Mm-hmm.
called Cable Value Network, and it was merged with QVC in the late '80s. And actually, in that process, that was the first time I ever got a taste of equity. And and so getting a six-figure payoff when the company was sold was a gigantic game changer for me and for my family. We all realized that there were ways without, that are not necessarily associated directly with showing up every day to the job, that could ultimately provide a real boon to the family as you persisted. And so my first experience with equity was enough to say, this is the way I want to proceed. And so five times since then, but the second, 5 times since then, have started enterprises designed to, get things off the ground and see how far we could take them. And in connection with the Food Network, uh, it was actually while creating one of those earlier networks that the people who were underwriting the effort started researching who could we get to turn this thing. At that point, we were calling it the Food Channel, and I think we evolved from that. And we looked at the state of the cable industry, and we thought it's a very competitive space, but we've identified a great demographic here. And it was a wonderful intellectual exercise to sort of say, gee, this gigantic demographic would really respond to the kind of content we're talking about. And it was content pioneered by the likes of Julia Child on PBS, as you may remember,
Yes.
or by, many of those ultimately chefs like Emerald and Rachel Ray and Ina Garten. I mean, all of these incredibly talented, uh, creative personalities who took their skills in the kitchen and put them on screen. And so and but as with all ventures, I think you as you know, I've been involved in a variety of startups, but my conclusion is that there's never been a founder of an enterprise. I mean, there may be people who claim the title, but the reality is that, there are always multiple people involved and multiple actions and activities that have to, that are incredibly significant. And I think that as a result, I feel in myself like co-founders are an underappreciated but critically important element of any venture of this ilk. So for example, with the Food Network, they brought me in for the project, and the first person I reached out to was the former president of CNN, who was someone I'd been doing business with, a fellow named Reese Schoenfeld. And Reese had been the president of CNN before he was let go by Ted Turner. And then he and he ultimately became the first president of the Food Network. And he brought a lot of credibility to that. And he was invaluable at developing a plan for getting it into the market. So he deserves credit as well, along with a long array of other people, especially a fellow named Joe Langan and a fellow named Trig Mirren, who I found both inspiring and supportive in their efforts to help us get this project going. So
That is so rich. When you look at and listen to this, it's like you never do things alone. And with such a creative, smart people, it's a shared effort, and it's unfortunately not as often as recognized. And I'm so glad you're highlighting that, because you continue, no matter what you put in yourself into, you continue to shine, and you continue to prove what you're made of. Because right now you are officially the 6th-time co-founder of very successful enterprises, and you always know where to insert yourself next, where it's possible, what's needed, and look it down the line in the future. So do you mind sharing? You're into something really exciting right now, and you obviously are changing the world. You are not only do you already build an amazing legacy, you already lived, and obviously leaving behind. But what's really important is to look at how you're also making huge contribution and difference in the world. Do you mind sharing that with our audience? Don't know about you.
I'll tell you what. When COVID hit, I had been in a partnership with IBM, collecting data from large venues around the world and analyzing that data. And it was an exciting business, because everyone and his mother has asked the question, what are those people doing on their cell phones? And we were trying to get answers to that question in large venues like convention centers and stadiums around the world. But COVID hit, and that business evaporated essentially in a day, because, of course, people were no longer going to large venues, and that happened globally. So after that happened, we were asking ourselves, what can make a difference in the world? How do we make a difference? I mean, how do we make a positive difference? Because, as you know, the world was dealing with enormous uncertainty at that time. And so the first thing I did was I looked at the state of sourcing and supplying for materials in the United States, and realized that, between there were sharks out there making representations, and there were people who were not getting stuff done. And I thought, well, if I proceed slowly and just, maybe I can help source and supply some PPE for America. And if I do that, worst case, best case is I save some lives, and maybe even better case, maybe we even make some money. But more importantly, I mean, I could save some people's lives with this process. I mean, I don't want to sound maudlin or naive, but it was just, I was just sitting around. As you remember, my wife was recovering from her tibial plateau fracture, which she'd had from skiing right next to me. a couple of months before, and so we were just found ourselves saying, okay, how do we make a positive difference? And so we started, sourcing and supplying those products. Lo and behold, found out that the whole medical arena is filled with an incredible variety of options, but there's so much. There's a great phrase that if you were from New York, you would know. It's called mishigas. It's a Yiddish word, and even for the Catholics among us, it's a word that every New Yorker knows. It means a mess, and the market was a mess, and so we brought other products in, and as you know, I think you've probably been the beneficiary of some of the COVID test kits we brought in for a year and a half. And every time I kept thinking, great, I want to shut this business down. There are other things I'd like to do. And just as I'd get close to that, we realized there were other opportunities. And the one that we're focused on right now, which is I think the one you're referring to, was we spent about a year and a half manufacturing and then getting through the FDA process. Biodegradable nitrile gloves. And that process was so interesting because literally every person we asked about it, whether it was my dermatologist, my dentist, my general practitioner, the doctors I was discussing my knee surgery with, the doctor we were discussing Wendell's tibial plateau fracture surgery with, everyone in the whole arena kept saying, we love this idea. We know there's so much pollution that's caused by the biodegradable gloves we have right now. And what I loved about it was I was able to get that one product. I didn't have to manage a team, which, as you know, is very time consuming. And it has its own rewards, but it's not, I just didn't want to do it anymore. I felt I could make a better contribution more directly. And that's what we did. And so here we are with these fantastic gloves that we're just starting to put into the market. I think I've talked to you about them a little bit, and it's going to be a way for us to make a positive contribution to the environment at a point in time where the environment has never been more vulnerable. So we're looking forward to it, and we're looking forward to marketing it out. We're just starting to work on putting together marketing elements because it took us a long time to get the product to the U.S., but we now have it in the U.S. We have it in factories. We have it in warehouses in the U.S. and we're even in discussions with various factories in the U.S. about manufacturing it here. We currently actually do our manufacturing in Malaysia, so it's not Chinese. That's good, given the global uncertainty of relations between the U.S. and China. And what can I say? It's a great project, and that is the one you were referring to, right?
Yes, and the reason why I'm asking this, because I love how you continuously, as a CEO, as a founder, as a thinker, look at things and find solution. Everybody's complaining how supply chain is disrupted. Everybody's complaining what's missing and what's not working. And you always somehow know intuitively not only how to pivot, but how also to make it happen. So we're now, as you mentioned, never been more vulnerable from looking from ESG perspective, from environmental perspective, social perspective, and of course around the governance, where obviously everything comes together. You playing in such a great area where you are also disrupting how we view healthcare. How do we consume and utilize products that are used daily to provide service to others? So to me, this is not just about the gloves. This is more than the gloves. It's a concept that is helping them to highlight ESG standards, but also be able to be more compliant and also start shifting in direction that we have to. And I'm hoping some companies will take that on sooner than later. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, as you know, it's kind of like making a baby. You can't make a baby in less than 9 months, right?
Yes.
You can start the process in a couple of seconds. If the timing is right, and you can get it going, and then but no matter whether you are the most powerful or wealthiest man in the world, or person in the world, I should say, or whether you're living in Soweto, it's going to take 9 months for that child to emerge. And in the same way, in my experience, the deal process, it's not as scientific, but the deal process, it takes time. You got to talk to people. As you know, building trust with people always takes time, and in connection with any deal, there is a trust element, promises made, that lovely phrase that Robert Service famously has from the cremation of Sam McGee: a promise made is a debt unpaid. And the trail has its own stern code. I love that phrase. And that's, that's something we live by. If you make a promise to someone, you've got to come through on it. And if you don't, the trail will come, rise up against you. And that's, and so that's that's an ambition as well.
That's a beautiful thing, and walking the walk and stepping up and being truly a true leader, not because somebody is watching and how you might be perceived, but because of your own integrity, your own conduct, your own values. And that is so beautiful, because always having conversations, not only to tap into your wealth of knowledge and wisdom and experience, but is also just knowing, it's like, I just know who you are in the core and what I can expect. And right now we're dealing in a world where is so many things that we cannot anymore predict or expect, and people change, people switch, people sway in different direction, and that's fortunately what's lost. And it's sad, we have to say, from leadership standpoint, we need to build more of those trusted relationships with shared value, with the shared goals and objectives. And I'm full 100% behind you, because of what you're doing and how you're moving the needle in the right direction, that not all of us are ready maybe yet to consume or observe or explore, but is coming. Are you ready or not, right?
I agree. Absolutely. I agree. I think it is coming. Although, Isabella, when I hear you even say those words, I'm reminded of your own story. And I hope that you, in this podcast, also share with people the stories you've shared with me about the young girl, moving from Croatia to Sweden and on from there, because that's that's a very inspiring story. And in the decade and more that we've known each other, probably maybe getting closer to 2 decades, huh?
Yeah.
I personally have always admired your creativity and your, passionate optimism for taking the next steps and for trying. And would I hope that you, if not in this podcast, somewhere, get to share some of your lessons about distinguishing between, the best people you've worked with and people who have been more challenging to cross paths with. Because I find myself, after all the years and experience that I have, I find that if I am right 50% of the time with the people that I'm crossing paths with, I can do okay. I can survive that. The business can flourish. And that's just being right 50% of the time. And, and when I say right versus wrong, I don't mean, I don't mean that necessarily they're unscrupulous or anything. I just mean they may not be right for this team, and for this team, you're going to need someone who can rebound, and you're going to see someone who can take a 3-point shot, and someone who can bring the ball up, and someone who can box out, and someone who can make the pass. So all of those ingredients are all critical in any business setting, and they are, but they're not easy to put together. And I what I love is that you've done this so many times with your own projects. I just relish the times you've shared with me the lessons you've learned in that process.
Thank you so much. And that's the beauty when we have a relationship, as you mentioned, based on honesty, trust, transparency. And when we don't get it right, or when we learn something that gets disclosed later on, and how do we again be credible or get the enthusiasm going? and continue, because it sometimes feels defeated, right? Did we just lost the game, or we lost the season? Did we lose the championship? And who do we lose? And did we lose ourselves in the process? Which I'm sure a lot of people can resonate as they're watching and listening. This amazing conversation with you, Stephen. But you also push things further. I just love how you also found a great opportunity to do something new, very niched, and it's called Going Back. And has so many beautiful metaphors, right? It has so much depth and different meaning. And you publish book, which you now also publish out there among all these amazing accomplishments in your career, which first of all, kudos. And then also bring so much to everybody, because time is flying, things are changing. And it's always good to go back to some of those moments and those people that you're still in touch with and that you still trust and do business with and cherish times together. So do you mind sharing a little bit for everybody that is listening and watching? What is the book about?
Okay, thank you so much for asking. I had the privilege of being the chair of our 50th reunion from high school, and in that process, I started crossing paths with a lot of people who I'd gone to school with, who I hadn't really spent much time with in the preceding 50 years since high school. But what was a great lesson there was that first of all, it was incredibly rewarding. I mean, people were, really gracious and curious and active, and had been doing wonderful things with their lives, and it was great to hear their stories about what they were going through. But what really struck me was that reunions generally just deal with a few, specific issues, which are, how do you get people, how do you get information about people? Because the schools don't necessarily have it. And then two, once you get that information, how do you get people to attend the reunion? And then three, how do you make it a great reunion? So those three questions were top of mind. And through the process, I found myself thinking, gee, why can't I just go to Amazon and pick up a book on this? And all of my efforts to find insights about how to have a great reunion, how to get people to attend, how to track people down were unsuccessful. And so I sort of stumbled onto the process, and it became a really, really interesting process. And we ultimately had great success doing it. And so we had a great reunion, and I thought, wow, this is really rewarding. And I guess on top of everything else, I thought, in my lifetime, I'm not sure America has ever been more divided in terms of politics and in terms of people's values, sort of the pressure between autocracy and democracy, and sort of women's rights and people's rights, and and sort of the antagonism just between groups. And I thought one of the great things about reunions is that it's a chance for people of different stripes to talk about things they have in common rather than things they don't. And that's what we found at our reunion, that was the case. And so I thought, wow, if we can create more opportunities like that, the world will be better off for it. And I guess we made a reference to private schools, because mine, Going Back, is all about planning an unforgettable reunion for private schools. And that was because one of the profound realizations was that the way private schools handle reunions and public schools is the difference between night and day. And purely because the private schools have people on staff whose job it is to manage this process, and public schools do not. And so that's a gigantic difference. And and then the positive experience of crossing paths with these people was just wonderful. And so many people I know, by the time you reach your 30th, 40th, 50th high school reunion, people are, it's less about sort of keeping up with the Joneses and more about sort of catching up with people who you appreciated, maybe people who you enjoyed spending time with back in the day. And the great thing about high school, of course, is that it's a chance to engage with people who knew you before you were who you turned out to be. Very,
Yes.
very complicated, but I didn't know who I was going to be at 17. My goal was to, basically either become a professional athlete or to become a professional musician or, or to be a professional skier, whatever the case may be. That was as far as I'd taken my ambitions and goals. And then you go to college and then you get the chance to go to graduate school and, take advantage of that. And it became a fascinating, all of these other subjects kick in. And so even you, my young Isabella, know that, through the years, you think of how your perspective has changed in terms of your values. And I just
Yes.
found myself thinking the world really needs this, needs to know more about how to bring people together. And I had the good fortune of being part of something that was very successful at bringing people together, and thought I'm going to share that knowledge with people. And so that's what I've done. And that's what the net result is going back. And volume one, of course, is about private schools, but the next one will be about people who go to public schools. And the third one will be about the fundraising process and maybe even about
Mhm.
colleges. So I feel like I've got a whole path ahead of me of how to tell some good stories here. And hopefully it'll generate some smiles and goodwill.
Oh my goodness. I just love this story. I love everything obviously you accomplished, but it's so beautiful again, being consistent who you are and through decades and decades of shaping and changing and growing and enduring and transforming, but yet in a core essence of who you are, never deviated. And I loved what a great gift for everybody else, because I can't agree more with you. The vision, different points of view, we forget to just be, Stephen, Isabella, and forget to have this conversation and forget to put all of the things aside and find how we can actually reconnect again, right? And how we can really tap into the beautiful friendship and some fun experiences. And as you said, share those great stories. That's what's life all about. So everybody watching and listening, you guys have a great opportunity. Also, I will provide the links to check Stephen's book that is Going Back, available on Amazon, but has so much depth meaning than just building and creating reunions that I'm sure everybody are thrilled to have. And frankly, Stephen, as we got older, it's also kind of, I know so many people say, oh, I don't want to go. I feel like I didn't succeed or I fail. How can I ever compete with someone who co-founded Food Network, who is so successful, who finished the law school, who has so much going on for them? And I hear always people kind of compare or don't feel good about themselves, how they look or how they age or where they're at. That is also fortunate, that flip side, right? But then I heard when they finally decide to go, as you said, none of those things matter, but matters to go back in that fearless, careless, fun, positive, invincible spirit. So what are your thoughts?
That's that was probably the most inspiring aspect of this process, and that what probably triggered my thinking about writing the book, because we do all bring, so many people bring so much anxiety to it. One story that I share in the book is that one of my classmates felt that he was bullied at school, and as a
Mhm.
result, he was thinking that he would never come back to the school. He was done. Well, lo and behold, we persuaded him to come back, and he received a Lifetime Achievement Award for work that he's done as a doctor, working on kidney dialysis processes that have been, world record setting. They've just changed the world. And he's a professor at Johns Hopkins, and he's just an enormously talented guy. And what a great way to bring it around, right? That this guy who felt that he was bullied in school was sitting there at our, on Saturday morning being celebrated. And he and his wife were both so honored and delighted. And it was just such a wonderful ending to, you know how Bob Dylan famously talks about in the times they are a changing, about he who is
Yes.
last will soon be first, and he on the bottom will soon be on the top, and come senators and congressmen don't block the halls, and mothers and fathers, let your children move on. And I think that was the one of the realizations in this process was that as people get older and have more and more of life experiences, they not only become more humble, but they become more curious. And you want to learn about, what was your story? How did you get here, Isabella? How are you at you know doing what you do, and where do you get the energy to do it, and where are the relationships that drive you? And I know in your case, whether it's your niece or your family members,
Mhm.
you've got those relationships to drive you. And what was so rewarding about this experience was that so many people who approached this with such trepidation ultimately came and felt it was an incredibly rewarding, positive experience. And the reason they did that is because, you know, I think we worked really hard to not make it a comparative, competitive environment, but more of a sort of a stimulating environment to, where your curiosity could flourish, and the warmth and feeling of both the school and of your classmates was able to come out. And it did in a really big way. And so I'm looking forward to doing that with many, many other reunions um, in the years ahead. Um,
I
you've not been back to your reunions, have you?
No, I have not, because they happen always in during the times in summer, or with the different projects or different goals, objectives for me, or things that I've been doing that prevented me to be at the right time at the right place. But it's also really interesting what you pointed out in contrasting what's going on right now in our country and in schools, and how much we have other issues at hand where people, as you mentioned, bullying, and unfortunately a lot of shootings and mass shooting and negative experiences going to trigger, fortunately, newer generation for years to come. And we have to restore that in our educational system. But also, as you said, as an opportunity to celebrate one another, not to bully, not to fear, but actually to see this as a great avenue to learn, even though we're different from each other, because differences are great in many ways, of differences of ways of thinking, because they stem creativity. As a result, we solve so many problems, otherwise we will not be able to do so.
Mhm.
And what would be your piece of advice for current generations and parents, or everybody watching and listening to this podcast? What would be your advice? How do we move forward, and how do we overcome challenges and difficulties that we're facing? You always put in a lot of efforts yourself, and I am absolutely thrilled, and I kudo you for all of your efforts. But what others you think could also do?
Wow. Uh, I think that searching for common interests, and just being curious about how people got to where they are. I mean, if you can encourage that in an environment, in any setting, where people to ask each other questions about what is what to explain their behavior, to explain their propensities, to explain sort of how they got to where they are and what they're thinking about going forward. The more understanding you can develop in that process, the easier it is to incorporate it into your own thoughts going forward in dealing with that person. I have friends whose politics are different from mine, and it's sometimes we're uh, self-conscious about that, and really, it sort of turns us off. But when I focus on the things that we have in common, it lends itself to much better conversations. And you made a reference to school shootings, so I'm a big believer in more regulation over guns, because I think that would have an impact on the
Mhm.
availability of weapons in our academic settings. And obviously, the more management we have uh, over those guns and the like, the better the chances of reducing the risks. And but when I think about that, I also think I've learned more about people who have, dealt with these things for a long time, and I don't want to sort of stop them from being able to protect themselves, but and so it's given me a greater understanding of why people want to have this perspective, and it just comes down to curiosity, to hearing their stories, right? If they were bullied, or if they were picked on, or if they saw people in their family who you know did inappropriate things with guns and dealt with that, then you got to pay attention, you got to listen more, and the better you become at listening, the better the outcomes will be for you and for the community that you're part of.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. And again, you're addressing very complex issues and you continue to do that, and you're not slowing down a bit. And in closing, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you lived your legacy. That's been evident in everything so far you accomplished, and how you raised your beautiful three sons, and now being a grandfather and future generation, just the stems from your family. But also, how did you led with this? What leadership you exuded through the process, not only in personal life, but also professionally. And then also leaving the legacy already that is going to impact so many generations to come. What else is in the bucket list? What are you deeply desiring to feel like you accomplish your mission, your purpose, and you achieve that? What that would be?
I think that'll continue until my last days on the earth, hopefully. I mean, whether it's, when we came up with the biodegradable nitrile gloves, it was because we'd seen that the market's needs were being met in connection with other kinds of products, in connection with masks, in connection with COVID test kits, in connection with gowns, and people's health issues. But we thought this was a product that the world had not yet seen that would really relish. And in the same way, so I hope to continue finding products like that can make the world a better place, and that can at the same time uh, ultimately provide for the people who are trying to make a difference, and including you. And then I think the same thing I made a reference earlier to. I've identified at least uh, two or three more books out of the one that I just started with the high school reunions, and so I'm looking forward to having more books out there, and sharing that information. And you're one of my inspirations for that, because when you wrote that book about your journey, I thought, the leadership principles, and I thought, uh, I hope that I ultimately come up with something as interesting a story as the one Isabella has shared with us. And while I don't know that this is as interesting, I'm hoping that it's a practical benefit for people dealing with a challenge that has been that has that continues to be as taxing and challenging as it was for our parents. Reunions are a big issue, and so fingers crossed, and we'll see where it goes.
Oh, that is exciting. I'm looking forward to many more books from you. And I also hope that you're going to write about your entrepreneurship mindset and muscle and spirit, because you have been consistently also building that and persevering, and some times during some challenges and difficulties, but everything changing around us, and always came on the top. And with that, I really wanted just to say in closing, for everybody watching and listening, which a lot of people are entrepreneurs, and then they're also having their own businesses or supporting other businesses to grow. What would you say, just because you have a great pulse on what's currently going on, what would you say it's one thing, if they could just do, that they're going to overcome all of these hurdles they're facing?
Wow. I mean, given your entrepreneurial journey as well, is there just one thing? I mean, I guess the most important thing is continue to keep your ears close to the ground, listen to what the market is telling you. And if you're getting the right message from the market, don't give up, keep going, and so those are the two things that matter the most to me, is sort of making sure I'm grounded in terms of ideas that make sense. And second, persisting when the ideas, when I run into roadblocks or have to make pivots, that's okay, as long as you keep the goal in mind. If the goal is to make a positive contribution to your society or your community, well, okay, can I do that through this? And until I can't, let's go, man. So that's my word to any entrepreneurs. And I would also, I guess my final comment would be to be humble, because when I started with this, is that there's no such thing as a founder. We're all co-founders, and I think in the same way, bringing humility to the process is I think essential. Ironically, it's humility combined with arrogance, because you have to have arrogance to think that you can make a difference. But you have to be humble enough to listen to what the market's telling you, and what the community's telling you, and what the client, prospective clients and customers are telling you, and what the manufacturers are telling you in connection with the product. And
thank you for listening to Legacy Leader Show. If you enjoyed the content and had a positive experience, then please leave us a positive rating. In addition, leave us a positive review whenever you are listening on whatever platform there might be. Make sure your friends and family also know about the benefit and value that we provide and what we have to offer. Cheers.